Hello, dear listeners, viewers. We are going on with the subject we have begun in our previous issue, the subject of what is going on in Ukraine as we speak. So, just as we decided in our previous issue, let us go on with our insight into the past, into the remote past, into the recent past, in order to see what's going on now and probably in the future. So, modern Ukraine is a completely new state. It was artificially created in 1990s. We remember that. Most of us remember the fact when Ukraine emerged as an independent state. And like most of those artificially created states, which happened many times in the 20th century, Ukraine is anything but homogeneous and anything but united. There is an interesting figurative metaphor, image, figurative but very accurate, that the distance between Moscow and the Pacific, you can imagine about 10,000 kilometers, is much shorter than the distance between two corners of the Ukrainian state, between the west and the east. The eastern corner of the Ukraine, Lugansk and Donetsk, which have now gained independence from the Kiev regime, are by and large Russian in their composition, in their mentality, in their language, in their mindset, in their culture, everything. That's just traditionally parts of Russia with certain tints related to the Ukraine. While the west of the Ukraine, the area with the center in Lvov, has never been Russian until very recently, until 1939, when the World War II broke out. Let me quote with this regard a famous Russian philosopher, an émigré philosopher, Fyodor Stepun, who lived in Germany, by the way, who was kicked out of Russia in the 20s. The Bolsheviks sent him out, like a few others, and he settled in Germany under Hitler. To make sure you understand, that area, Lvov, in surrounding region, was part of or belonged to Poland, Lithuania, Habsburg Empire, then again to Poland, and then in 1939 was acquired by the USSR. So Fyodor Stepun writes, with Hitler's permission, Lvov is now included in the USSR. My heart does not rejoice upon this victory. After all, the Soviet Union is still Russia, and its aggressive conquests only tarnish its image. And besides, the heightened nationalist passions in today's Europe are so disgusting that one cannot help but willing to purge them from our Russia. Despite all the horrors of the communist regime, the benign image of Russia is so strong that she is still seen more an intercessor for enslaved than an enslaver of other nations. This message, well, it's not a message, it's part of his work, published work by Fyodor Stepun. Well, it's really prophetic. Think about it, how it has been realized in the post-war era and up until this day. Now coming closer to our present time. On February 22nd, 2014, with an active participation of radical nationalists, a violent change of power took place in Ukraine. Little wonder for such a diverse and non-homogeneous country. More than 100 people were killed, and after that, armed nationalist units gained legal rights in Ukraine. And the last phase of the process began, which is now coming to fruition. The heightened nationalist passions, which Theodor Stepan mentioned, which were inherited directly from Hitler, led first and foremost to an attack on the right of the Ukrainians to use their native tongues, primarily, of course, Russian, but also Hungarian, Bulgarian, Romanian, and a few others. In public space and in the educational area, educational space, these rights have been finally abolished in 2019. For 5 years, Ukrainians tried to defend their right to use their languages, but in vain. Now, it's all gone. A particular tragedy in the course of that struggle, legal struggle, public struggle, was the destruction by nationalists of peaceful protesters in Odessa, right then in the year 2014. Television showed how dozens of people were pushed into a building which was then set ablaze, and those who survived the fire were tortured and brutally murdered. The perpetrators, however, have never been punished. For 8 years, the armed confrontation with the Kiev regime in the territory of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics have never stopped. According to United States estimates, according to the United Nations estimates, civilian casualties in these areas amounted to more than 3,300 killed and 9,000 wounded, while combatants killed amount to 10,000 individuals, with 24,000 more wounded. The number of refugees from the area until February 2022 amounted to approximately 1.3 million. If it is not a war, then what it is, then what it was. The conflict has been marked by a series of war crimes, mostly committed by the Ukrainian nationalists and their armed groups. Reports from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights have noted repeated cases of torture, looting, sexual violence, and abuse of civilians. But no political response has ever been allowed by the Western powers. In recent years, Nazi ideology has been fully supported by the Ukrainian authorities. World War II participants on Hitler's side have been glorified, memorial rallies held, torchlight marches held, and Nazi symbols have been distributed across the country. All of these events, as well as the forcible imposition of the Ukrainian language, remained for the Kiev regime without any consequences from the so-called Western democracies. In September 2014 and February 2015, agreements were signed in the city of Minsk in Belarus between the representatives of Ukraine and the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. However, these agreements were never honored by the Kiev regime. The ceasefire was regularly violated by the Ukrainian side. Would Donetsk and Lugansk violate ceasefire if they are 100 times weaker militarily wise than the Ukrainian regime? The shelling of towns in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics was almost daily. Civilians were killed and injured, and civilian infrastructure was destroyed. Moreover, in an interview with the Financial Times on April 26, 2021, Mr. Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, announced that Ukraine would not honor the Minsk agreements at all. Throughout the year 2021 and January-February of 2022, the intensity of strikes on the territory of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics steadily increased. International observers recorded numerous instances of artillery and missile attacks by Ukraine against schools, businesses, residential areas, and buildings. On February 18 alone, 2022, a week before the Russian armed forces began their operation, over 15 ceasefire violations were recorded in the Lugansk and Donetsk area. Drawing the bottom line, even such a cursory review of events of the recent past and remote past leads us to a clear conclusion regarding the present operation of the Russian armed forces. If it had been possible, it should have been avoided. If the conditions were right, it should have been completed immediately. But for the present time, it is strictly necessary for the restoration of peace and justice, which the Russian Church sincerely seeks, together with all sane people on the planet Earth. The rest is up to you to judge, to make conclusions, to make your decisions. Goodbye.